Welcome to Cisco Tech Beat, the podcast that explores the people and stories behind what inspires the newest innovation. I am your host, AB, and I'm thrilled to welcome Ammar Maraqa, Cisco's Chief Strategy Officer. Ammar is responsible for shaping the company's strategy and aligning priorities across the enterprise. He also oversees Cisco M&A and investment efforts, as well as our incubation team known as Outshift. Ammar, welcome to Tech Beat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So glad we made this happen. Been looking forward to this. I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to start with M&A, as it is a cornerstone of Cisco's growth. Some people describe it as an art and a science. And I'm wondering, what is Cisco's strategy when it comes to acquisition? And how do you ensure that a deal really lasts long-term as opposed to just being a huge headline?
Yes, I'm glad you're starting with M&A. It allows me to say one of my favorite things, which is no company should have an acquisition strategy. There should be a growth strategy, and you use M&A as a lever to actually go and execute against that strategy. Because at the end of the day, especially at Cisco, we really think about innovation and a lot of levers that allow us to actually go after that innovation execution, ways to accelerate the roadmap, ways to try to get to market faster. So these are things like M&A or the build, the buy lever, if you will. There's obviously the build lever, or the R&D that we do. There's investments, venture investments that we do, partnerships, and then incubation. And these are all sort of collectively the things we try to do to accelerate innovation. You're right, it's an art and a science. I think in a lot of ways, one of the great things about Cisco is we actually have been in the game for a long time. We've acquired a lot of companies. And as a result, we have a lot of great processes and playbooks and that give us maybe make that art a little bit more of a science, but definitely there continues to be both qualitative and quantitative things that you need to think through. I think for me, one of the most important things is really clarity around what's the intent. So why do you want to do an acquisition? How does it fit within the strategy? Have you done your diligence around, can you build it versus buy it? Are you realistic in your expectations? I think there's a lot of science around making sure you're doing the right diligence, you're asking the right questions, you're checking with customers, you're checking the roadmaps, you're checking technology. All of these things really are science. Spending a lot of time with the team. I think where the art comes in is really a combination of, are you aligned and can you stay aligned throughout the process? Are you able to not sort of fall in love with just one company or one deal and really be kind of stay true to the acquisition thesis and what you're trying to build? And then the other thing is there's a lot of art and science that also goes after you do the deal in the integration itself, because that's ultimately where you drive a ton of value, and making sure that everything is consistent. So the way the thesis or the business case that you put together is consistent with the strategy, but it's also consistent with the integration plan. And having these things stay in alignment throughout the process, I think is where there's a lot of work that needs to happen, a lot of alignment, a lot of teams that have to come together cross-functionally. And it's a really important lever for us, especially in technology, because if you believe that all innovation is going to come from inside the company, you're most likely going to be left behind and you're going to miss a bunch of really great things happening around you in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And you kind of helped me segue naturally to my next question, because I was going to get into innovation a bit and talk about AI, which of course is a headlining topic. And I know at Cisco, we're kind of shifting from AI simply being just a tool for efficiency and becoming more of like a business model innovation. So from your point of view, like, how is our AI infrastructure build out? What does that look like? And where do you see Cisco playing in that realm?
Yeah. So maybe let me talk about two separate things. I think what's happening in the market around us, I think is pretty exciting. I mean, you hear about it all the time, this trillions of dollars of CapEx being projected to be spent by these hyperscalers and enterprises on building out AI capacity. And that is clearly real. There's a lot of demand and they're building like crazy. And as an infrastructure vendor, this is great for us because we actually want to take our fair share of that spend. It's also very clear that all these models have, or AI in general is having a lot of bottlenecks. Compute is a real bottleneck. Power is a real bottleneck, but also more and more we're seeing networking, which is what we do, the bread and butter of Cisco, is becoming more and more important when these models are being trained and over time when people are using these models in inference. And so it's becoming so important for networking to evolve and continue driving both technology from a speed and feed perspective, but also resilience and all of that, because it's becoming really, really expensive to train these models. And if your network fails, you're really throwing money out the window. And so you've seen now networking basically connecting GPUs together, for example, within a rack. The models are getting so big that you need to train them across racks. And that's what you hear. Sometimes you hear the word scale out, which is you're connecting different racks using networking. And then now the models are so big that you need to actually do the training across different data centers that may be sort of kilometers apart, right? And you're doing that through scale across type of networking. And so the ability to do that and continuing to make sure that the network is resilient is becoming more and more important, which is great for us because it takes a lot of the innovation and experience we have and allow us to be even more relevant for our customers. So that's on the kind of infrastructure build out side. I think on the how are people using AI, and you mentioned Cisco, right? So we're using it internally. I think there's no doubt now that in development, in product development, software development, it is very clear that the world has completely changed and people are using AI to get a ton of productivity, really collapsing time to, getting features out the door. It's quite exciting. And even at Cisco, we're using that in a tremendous way. It's actually really exciting. The other place is very clear is around customer success, customer support, where you're able to just empower the customers to do a lot of self-serve, but also it allows us to just get a lot more intimate with our customers and leverage AI to answer questions and be proactive and all of that. Those are become, I think, very clear. But the expansion of use cases is coming in all of the different areas. And it really starts with how do you just drive productivity? How do you automate? How do you change workflows so that people can use AI to get more productive? I think, though, there is some real bottlenecks in not just in the infrastructure compute that I can mention, but also in adoption. So things like change management, things like security, which is really critical, is not really completely solved. Data access, all of these things are real inhibitors to adoption. It also makes a company like Cisco really important because we as a trusted vendor for our customers can really help them think through how to adopt AI. And the more we adopt it internally, I think the more lessons learned we will have that we can share with customers. And so on both sort of the build out side and then helping our customers adopt, I think we have a big role to play. And it's quite exciting because we're pretty early in the journey, I would say.
Absolutely. And, we internally, we always talk about how we have this advantage at Cisco. I would love for you to dive in a bit, especially when it comes to the one Cisco approach. And, we've talked about infrastructure and the adoption process, but how does the one Cisco approach kind of put us in a unique position to deliver AI-driven outcomes that maybe others simply can't?
Yeah. I think one Cisco is a great way to basically take the power or the breadth of our portfolio and sort of distill it in a way that is really customer-centric. So if I just step back for a second, the strategy at a high level is we are the critical infrastructure for the AI era, right? It's a relatively straightforward, but it's a pretty big big statement, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of the outcomes that you mentioned around one Cisco, really the way that came about is we stepped back and said, hey, what are the biggest problems we're trying to solve for customers? What are the biggest outcomes we're trying to drive for them? So one was helping them build AI-ready data centers. So we just talked about the build-out. Data center infrastructure itself is changing quite a bit. When we talk about agents, a lot of these are, consider them digital workers. They're going to live in the data center. So how do you get our customers' data centers to evolve and keep up with that change? You need a lot of great solutions there. And that's the sort of AI-ready data center, and a lot of architecture is being changed there. The second outcome is really to help customers future-proof their workplaces. So what is that?
Yeah.
That is where a lot of your physical workers, the actual humans, live, work. And that doesn't, by the way, have to be an office. It now is, it's hybrid work, right? So it could be in a coffee shop, it could be in the car, it could be, wherever people work. And how do you basically make sure that that's connected, resilient, secure, and how do you connect it with all these digital workers that are going to actually exist in the data center, and how do you make that seamless for customers? And then the third big outcome is really around digital resilience. And I think the way I like to describe digital resilience is it's a way to keep your systems up and running. Because if you're a CEO and you have a website where you're driving sales or revenue, if your website is down, I would say you don't really care why it's down. You just want to get it up and running as soon as humanly possible, because every digital outage out there or every systems outage is costing you a lot of money. And so whether it's a security event that's bringing you down, you're under attack, or whether it's a it's a systems issue where you need observability to go drive it. At the end of the day, you want your systems to be resilient, and you want to proactively know when they're in trouble, and you need to get them up and running as soon as possible. That's really digital resilience. And that's where a lot of security observabilities, the Splunk acquisition that Cisco made really is a really critical part of that. And then across all of these three outcomes, we've talked about security everywhere. We really want to sort of envelop all of that with security and make sure that the security that we have is fused into the network and exists everywhere. And we're trying to sort of wrap all of that also with a bunch of AI outcomes, right? So how do you make it easy for customers to deploy, to use, to drive? And to your earlier question, at the end of the day, we have lots of different pieces of our portfolio, but we're trying to bring them together for our customers to really connect it to outcomes and bring them together as much as possible for them to be easy to deploy, easy to consume, and get them to get to value really, really quickly. So that's kind of the one Cisco that allows us to take the breadth that we have and really offer it to customers in a way that drives outcome for them.
I love that. There's so much to consider and there's so much going on, but really the end goal ultimately for the customer anyway is to have a simplified experience. So that's what we're trying to do with all of the products and the solutions that we offer. And I think it's a great point. To make.
Great way to bring them all together and maybe put it in a way where, like, what are we trying to do for the customer ultimately? Because that's what.
Absolutely. Sticking on a technology theme, but going somewhere totally different. I'm going to jump just quickly into quantum, which is, I don't want to say it's the next AI, but quantum is huge. And I know it's right. It's on the horizon. Some of it's already here. How do we approach that when we're unsure of the outcomes, but we want to make sure that, we're going to commit to this technology? It's something that we're definitely invested in.
Yeah. And I mentioned when we talked about all the innovation levers, I think Incubate was one of those levers that I mentioned. So this gives me a chance to talk about that. So quantum at Cisco is one of these technologies that we know is on the horizon, but it's relatively early. It's not a product that exists today. There aren't clear requirements yet. It's a really evolving technology, but we know it's really important. And so we made the decision a while back to incubate some technology around quantum in order for us to understand how is that market evolving, what's our play look like. And that's really, we do that through a mechanism or a team called Outshift that is really our incubation engine sort of within Cisco. And by the way, there's incubation happening everywhere, but this is sort of a very specific team that's trying to look ahead on some of these things where either the technology is really early, so we call that sort of technology risk. We don't know whether the technology is really out there or not. There's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of prototyping that goes into it. Or the technology, we call it market risk, meaning there is a technology, but we really don't know yet what the use case is going to be or what the customer value is going to be. So let's not sort of burden the rest of Cisco with it. Let's actually do some work and incubate it internally within this Outshift team, and then maybe graduate it when time is ready. So quantum networking specifically is a good example of this technology risk that I mentioned. And so what are we trying to do? If you actually step way back, when the internet first got going, Cisco's power was we took a bunch of disparate technology and connected it together and allowed people to basically network these machines and really be able to communicate for the first time in a way that was completely independent of what the endpoint actually was. Like, we connected these machines regardless of the protocol that they use or regardless of the machine that came together, which is really, really powerful. We're trying to do something similar at quantum. So today, a lot of the press is about actually building these quantum computers, right? And so you hear about them. They need to be, in sub-zero temperatures, and they are huge and so on. What they're doing is they're basically building the scale to be able to generate these qubits, which is the quantum, right? The quantum unit that allows you to say, like, am I getting enough compute power in order to go solve these massive problems I want to apply quantum to? And these are really big, hairy problems, like in biology, in pharma, in geology, et cetera. And in order to solve these problems, though, you need lots and lots of these qubits, right? Lots of power. And our approach is to say, instead of thinking that you're going to basically scale these computers to be enormous and generate lots and lots of qubits, what if you take a bunch of these types of computers or quantum computers and actually connect them together? And they can work on different technologies, but what we want to standardize is the way they communicate. And can you basically take that problem and distribute it so that you don't have to manage these enormous machines as you need them to scale? What if you actually just instead of scaling these machines up, you scale them out, you scale them horizontally, and you connect them together? And so we're actually prototyping a quantum switch, which is a great example actually of We're saying, hey, we're prototyping it. It's both a hardware and a software stack. It's got a lot of research around it. We've been working with partners, with universities, and we're going to put it out there and let people use it, get design partners. And actually, it's quite an exciting development from Cisco because we're now planting a real flag in quantum networking. It'll be the first kind of industry switch prototype that's out there. And so we're very excited to put it out there. But this is why we're trying to incubate. So it's not a product yet. It won't be a product anytime soon, but we think that we're making great progress into solving a real problem and taking a pretty novel approach to it.
Yeah, and that's so exciting. I mean, I think it's really just great that Cisco has a team. And as you mentioned, we innovate across the company and across each organization. But to have a team really dedicated to doing the work and fine-tuning, troubleshooting, failing,
that's right,
then achieving, right? I mean, that's really the name of the game to achieve these new innovations that we come up with.
That's right. And that's a great way to think about it. You got to give the room to fail. You got to give the room for people to be not thinking about necessarily what's happening today or over the next 12 months. And that's a real luxury to have. I mean, that's the power of Cisco's scale and breadth and our trusted relationship with customers, that we can go and do that. And we sort of get to benefit from being early. And we get to fail, but every time you fail, you're also learning something. So it all works all together.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting talking about quantum, and then prior to that, we were talking about AI. And of course, a common thread that was mentioned, albeit quickly at one point, was customer value, but we know how much we cherish that. And I want to kind of jump a little bit back, maybe a step back into just innovation in general, because I think a lot of people think of innovation as a new product or like something that we build, right? Whereas we are thinking about innovation as how do we drive value for the customer.
Yes.
So how does Cisco foster that culture where really it's about driving, great value for the end user versus just building businesses that kind of slog along and, until you get something going, you get something going?
Yeah. I think, it's funny for me, I'm very passionate about this. I think when all else fails, the best thing you can do is just think customer back. It actually solves a lot of problems where generally in technology companies, it's very easy to fall in love with the technology and basically think about solving problems for the sake of technology, as opposed to thinking, hey, what am I actually solving from a customer and a use case perspective? It's actually quite powerful and easy sometimes to lose track of. So that's sort of the first thing I would say. Just, is the technology being linked to a specific customer problem? Are you thinking customer back? How is it going to be deployed and used? I think that's really powerful to continue asking. And then for large companies, and Cisco is definitely one of the largest, I think thinking customer back is a great way to break any silos that may have developed over time, right? Customers don't buy functions. They don't buy sales and marketing and finance. They buy something. They buy a solution that they want to deploy and work and solve a customer problem. And so being able to always think about the customer, putting the customer hat on, what problem are we solving? What's their experience? What's the customer experience like dealing with Cisco or a technology or a partner of ours? It's a great way to sort of break through any kind of internal thinking. And it's a great way to always sort of keep your eye on the ball and think about the customer. I think you need to be agile when you're doing that, right? You need to be okay with failure as long as these things you're learning from and you're adjusting and you're giving yourself the room to, and again, keep your eye on the ball, and that ball being what's the customer experience, what's best for the customer. And are you then leveraging the scale that Cisco has, where we have hundreds of thousands of customers, we have lots and lots of partners? Are we taking the time to listen to the feedback that these folks are giving us? And I think it's such a great luxury that sometimes we forget. But the amazing number of touch points we have out there with customers, whether they're governments or private companies, small, medium businesses, they're all great market sensing points for us to know whether we're on the right track or whether we need to adjust. And so it's actually it could be quite a nice cut-through mechanism to always think about the customer and think about, from their perspective, are you delivering the value that you think you are, and test that all the time. And it's great because we see customers all the time, and that's a great way to start a conversation with them.
Yeah, it's definitely a good conversation starter. So you mentioned government, and it makes me think about the world today, which, obviously we see some geopolitical and some market challenges happening. And I imagine that will influence how you create your strategies for Cisco. How do we balance that? Like, how do we balance the need for long-term sort of multi-year strategy with a broad vision against the pressures that we face, currently, whether those be economic or otherwise?
It's funny in technology. I think part of the reason a lot of us work in technology is because it's such a dynamic market. So there's always things going on, new technologies and disruptions. I would say that, and I'm old, so I can say this. I think the amount of disruption we're seeing today is probably pretty high. It's pretty unique. It's not just technology with all the stuff we just talked about with AI, with silicon and hardware and networking, but also geopolitically, right? With all of the disruption happening, I think it's definitely a unique moment. The way I think about it is it's always a balance. You're always dealing with uncertainty. The way I approach it is to say, look, first of all, try to discern kind of between what's controllable and what's not. I think it's important to sort of figure that out. The other thing I would say is, hey, you're always going to need to focus on near term, what's happening today, tomorrow, in a week, or in a month. But you also got to leave some room in the thinking at the executive level of some of the longer term aspects. And it's really asking questions around where the market is going, what do the customers need, how technology is evolving. Give yourself the room to do that. And in my role, part of what I try to do with my own peers is to try to create that room in some ways, right? Through planning, through scenario modeling, things like that. The other thing that at the end of the day, the strategy is if you're being disciplined, you will actually go through the process of really documenting sort of what are the assumptions that you have in place, that you're putting in place when you put that strategy forward. And the discipline is to try to test those assumptions and whether things are changing, right? Are the geopolitical changes changing your assumptions or making you rethink some of these assumptions? Have some of them proven to be wrong from a technology or customer perspective? So if you are constantly sort of thinking about your assumptions and testing and validating whether they're still there, that's a great way for you then to adjust. And it's a great way for you to try to capture what's happening. You're not rigid in the sense that, hey, it's an assumption, it's a forecast, so you need to adjust and make sure you change. I think where people fall into potential problems is if you're constantly changing strategy, then I would argue maybe you didn't have a great strategy to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's about changing assumptions, not necessarily changing strategy all the time. But also you can't be arrogant enough to think that the assumptions are not going to change, because we know in this market, it's changing actually dramatically. And so give yourself the space, think about long-term, or carve out some time to think about long-term, document those assumptions and make sure you're testing them and being really realistic about were we right or not in those assumptions, and then adjusting, right? And measuring and adjusting. And that's really the best you can do. And try to make as many, hopefully the right pivots and assumptions as you can, and then learning from whatever mistakes you have made or whatever false assumptions you may have made.
Absolutely. I imagine that's almost the same strategy that somebody on the incubation team would take. I mean, you have some ideas, you make some assumptions, but you're open, as you said, flexible to what may come, and it may be totally different than what you expected. So
that's totally right. And I think it's important to when people a lot of times talk about technology and say, hey, it's very hard to make a 3-year forecast in technology. I think that's probably true. One of my favorite sayings is, the one thing you know for sure about a forecast is that it's wrong, because it's a forecast. And so it's okay, but as long as you know your assumptions and you're able to articulate the logic for why you're making certain sort of decisions, I think that's the most critical part.
You alluded to this already in a couple questions ago, but Cisco's really making somewhat of a shift from being a company that creates individual products, and really we're becoming a powerhouse in terms of creating platforms, integrated platforms.
Yeah.
So why is integration so critical for Cisco, and how does that change the way we actually go to market when it's time?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I think actually it's probably one of the most important strategic sort of pivot points for us as a company, because and the reason I say that is I think we're not just talking about creating a platform or bringing the portfolio together. We're actually putting investments sort of behind it and making trade-offs that allow us to do that. And really, if you think about why, I mentioned it a little bit before, the power of Cisco is the breadth of the portfolio that we have and the amount of customer relationships and partner relationships that we have. But if we show up as a bunch of fragmented, business units or fragmented products, you're really taking away from the power of that breadth, right? Yeah. What's the point of having such a broad portfolio if you're not able to bring it together and add value where 1 + 1 = 3? right? If you atomize yourself, then anybody can compete with you, even though they may be, a tenth of your size. And so,
Yeah.
so part of it selfishly is how do you drive advantage and actually sort of make it real, the fact that we have such a broad portfolio. You need to bring it together. You need to make it easier to consume. You need to basically, and I think G2 says the platform is a way to make the marginal ingestion of net new technology lower for the customer. So when they buy the next thing from Cisco, it just works better. It's easier to consume. It's sort of seamless for the customer. And if we're able to do that, it just becomes not just value add for the customer, it also makes our broad portfolio even more valuable. I think the good news is customers are looking for that, right? There's so much complexity right now. Everybody wants to consolidate to fewer trusted vendors. And they're really looking to vendors to say, hey, bring your stuff together, make it easier for me to consume, easier to manage in one place. All of these things are really stuff we hear about from customers all the time. So in a lot of ways, we're going to where the market wants to go. And we have the breadth to be able to bring it together and add a lot of value to these customers. I think the other thing I would say is it's also helpful for our go-to-market teams, because the less you're able to talk about feature by feature, product by product, and the more you're able to put it in broader platform terms, the easier it'll be for them to show the value of that portfolio to customers and allow customers to, focus on the use case, focus on the outcome, and then the platform allows you to get there. And then we're putting, like I said, real investments behind it. So for example, Cisco Cloud Control is a great example where we're trying to bring the power of the portfolio together. You have one place that allows you to configure, drive policy, troubleshoot, and over time, I think you'll see that more and more. Same thing is happening in services, by the way, with things like Cisco IQ, bringing a bunch of services-oriented things together. And so across the company, you'll see us really moving towards this platform. And it's not just talk, it's really making sure that the next feature or the next product works really well with everything else and adds value towards everything else. And I think that's it's a great sort of direction for the company. And you'll see us actually continue to talk about it at Cisco Live and on all the subsequent sort of engagements with customers and partners.
Beautiful. Love that. So one of the things I always tell people that I love about Cisco is how in tune our leadership team is with employee well-being. And that's whether you're working or you're at home, just making sure that we have a really good balance between work life and home life. So I'm curious, when you're not working at all, what are the things that you do, activities or hobbies that help you find that balance?
Yes, it's very important to have some of those. For me, I think there are two big ones. I'm a big foodie, so I love to cook. And it actually, like, the whole process very much de-stresses me, right? It's like, it's relaxing. The whole idea of like researching new recipes, developing a plan, cooking. So that's one big one. And then the second one is I'm a big movie and TV guy. And so whenever I can, I try to watch movies, listen to a lot of podcasts around movies. So movies and food really are the two big ones. And then, been traveling as my kids have gotten older. We've been going to more adventurous places. That's always fun whenever you can get away from work and travel. So those are really the things that I do outside of work.
I love that. I love food. I love travel. I can totally relate to that. Two great hobbies and passions to have. So I'm right there with you. Ammar, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate your insights and some of your personal life likes. And I hope that we get to meet in person at some point.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.